Welcome everybody, and this is another policy hack session that we are having. Normally we do all this policy hack discussions either in the form of a panel or sometimes just a blog. So it's a video blog that we post for information for all of you. So this one is basically is on a very important subject and very interesting for all of us. Is on the mapping policy. This is announced yesterday, and the policy is already out, and a very important subject because map information is a very important piece in any transaction, whether it is to do with e-commerce or many other industrial applications. And we feel that it is very important for digital India. It's also important for many other issues which we will be covering during this discussion. So I think there are people in the panel, experts from many sides. We are waiting for Rohan also to join. People who understand, this particular technology and the policy issues to do with it. People who understand the application of, mapping data. People who understands how do how will we grow the ecosystem, and definitely when Rohan comes up, how ready they are, because they have done a lot of work in this area, and he can tell us how ready they are and what else can happen in the ecosystem. So to start with, I think instead of me introducing, I will request all of you, starting from Lalitesh, if you could just spend a few seconds introducing yourself.
Hi, I'm Lalitesh, and I'm an engineer working on a couple of startups these days. Been a volunteer for various policy efforts in the last few years, and had experience building maps before.
Hi, this is Umakant here. I'm CEO of AI and Robotics Technology Park, ArtPark, set up by Indian Institute of Science and seed funded by Department of Science and Technology and Government of Karnataka to the tune of $32 million, and also chairman of AI Foundry, an investment firm which looks at creating leapfrog AI companies. Yeah, very briefly, map is something that has been close to my heart, specifically looking at the potential opportunities it has, especially for bringing the physical and the digital world alive.
Sudhir, thank you. Hi, I'm Mohit. I work with Zomato. As you know, maps are very integral to providing our services to consumers in all parts of the country. That's me.
Thank you so much. And so I mean, on the subject, when we start discussing, there is a lot of things that we can discuss, but we have limited time, and I hope we will all try to honor that time. We have about 40 minutes feasible video to be posted with the transcript on a blog. So but let us start a few aspects that we can cover up in this time. I think the first important thing is to understand the policy and its important points that we have. So I will request Lalitesh, because he is deeply involved into both the technology aspect of it, the business aspect also, and the policy aspect. He understands the policy that's been announced. So Lalitesh, if we can hear from you 3 to 4 most important features that this policy covers, which will be beneficial for the industry at large.
So actually, I don't think there are more than 3 things about this policy. One of the nice things about this policy is there's very little to cover. It simply says that all the other maps policies that used to exist in various departments currently stand null and void, and they're replaced by this one very simple policy that has been issued. So people who embark on mapping don't have to worry. They don't have to look behind their back, and they're subject to only 2 rules. If you're an Indian company, you can map anything except for a small blacklist of attributes and features that you should not map. I'm sure they'll be related to military and security. And you can map using whatever technology that you want. You can use LiDAR, you can use high resolution cameras, you can use whatever, right? Underwater, over water, everything you can is now fair game. And you can not just create maps, you can disseminate, sell, distribute, and so on. The only restriction, if anything, is that international mappers are restricted to a higher level of resolution, presumably for security purposes. And they cannot also have access to maps, higher resolution maps created by Indian entities, right? And that's it. That's all the policy is. And that is the magic of this new policy. It's just so simple that it creates freedom to map for everyone.
Thank you, Lalitesh. So, I mean, we'll be covering definitely, Lalitesh, I'll come back to you. I think the application areas that we can have multiple applications of geospatial data and how we can really use mapping in different industries. But we have on the panel at least one industry leader who directly uses this application for their business. And let us hear from Mohit. How important and what change will this bring into their business? What is his perspective?
Thank you, Sudhir. Thank you, Lalitesh, for the perspective. I think, overall for me, I think one of the most important things is government taking notice of this very important area. I think it sort of says that we are coming of age in terms of understanding of the digital infrastructure required to really build, high quality businesses and services across a large spectrum of different areas, and therefore debottlenecking, and also, from an ease of, ease of doing business point of view. I also saw a press article, in the last day or two about ISRO and MapMy India collaborating, which again, like Indian entities, basically both government entities as well as, semi-government entities and private entities, combining forces to actually address this very strategically important area of mapping is a very, very happy news for us, and we welcome it. We'd love to partner with again all initiatives in this area, because for services like ours, it's basically a foundational service that we need, right? We've tried in the past experimenting with various different players who provide mapping services, both Indian and international, and really, when you want to provide highest quality of services to users, you end up working with pretty much one mapping service, and then you're at their whims and fancies in terms of what they want to provide, in what form and shape, what they want to charge for it, and so on and so forth, which is obviously not a great place for Indian businesses to be in. And to that extent, we welcome this move by the government and the vibrant ecosystem it's likely to generate.
And I think we will have more from you going ahead on this discussion. But let us move on to Mr. Umakant and hear from him what changes, how does it impact the overall economic perspective and innovation, especially startups. How does it impact those people?
Absolutely. So one quick thing actually I want to share is like, it was, a couple of years back, there was a very interesting move, by probably the only credible map provider in the world, Google, which raised the pricing, in some instances from 10x, 10x to 20x. And, they completely took away the, so earlier the maps, if you were using, there was still a certain number of hits, that used to be free, and a lot of startups used to try them, but then they took that away and the pricing structure changed. And given that, if I look at the whole, impact of mobile revolution, right? So what was different in mobile, right? So the one fundamental thing that was actually different in mobile was the use of location, right? So wherever you are located by where you are, right? And then the context around you can change, right? And so because the context around you is changing, and you know that context because you know where the person is, you can actually deliver multiple kinds of services, right? So to really see that, right, the immersion of the digital world into the physical world started with the whole mobile revolution. And I think people like Zomato, Ola, I mean, these are the kind of companies that have actually really profited from that perspective. But if you really see, and this is coming from the real numbers, right? So out of 4 rupees that you are earning through your services, if 1 rupee is actually going towards the mapping needs that you are paying for, right, that is actually very tough, because you will find it tough to sustain certain kind of business models, right? So I think this is a great move, which is actually going to create many more of such options. And more options means that it will actually be impacting on the price, and eventually it will benefit the consumer, which is definitely the Indian consumer. The second perspective, which is a larger perspective that I would like to share about, we are talking about 5 trillion, $10 trillion economy by 2030 or 2035, right? Now, there was a very interesting report that was actually shared by AON, the guys who actually do insurance, that 90% of the value now lies in the intangible assets, which is the primarily the data and other assets, which are you cannot, you're not able to, tangibly define them. Now, the challenge is that we are right now at 3 trillion. We want to go to 10 trillion. We're talking about additional 7 trillion. Out of that 90%, 6.3 trillion is going to be in the digital domain, right? Now, if we are not owning the critical pieces of, that, economy, which is going to create these intangible assets, we will not be reaching 10 trillion. We might actually get to maybe 3.7 or 4 trillion. That's it in another 10 years, right? And that's a reality. So what government, and I think that's a great welcome step, the government is trying to do, is to say, okay, you have this whole new, and you can just take this perspective from me, right? Like Google aims to make $5 billion from mapping alone, as a business, right? By 2025, or earlier if their current projections actually show. But I feel that they're actually inherently underestimating that potential. Baidu estimates that mapping is going to generate more money than actually the search business. This is in China, right? So let's examine like why people are talking about something like that. And Baidu and Google both are actually very large players, right? They know what they're talking about, right? So one is that the direct services perspective, that we are able to take care of it, right? Like you have something to serve a human being, you're able to figure out where is he, and you're able to deliver food, you're able to deliver other goods that he has ordered, right? But that is just the beginning of it, right? So earlier maps were built with satellite imagery. Even before that, they were built with physical inspection. In the future, so the mapping technology has always moved. In future, 70% of the data is going to come from sensors, right? And they could be lidar sensors, and that's why this policy is great, because it's actually freeing that up. You can bring whatever data you can map, or whatever technology you choose, you can do that, right? So the next generation of maps, right, are going to leverage a lot of these sensors to augment what you're seeing from satellites and other sources, right? So it's a very fundamentally different way of looking at the world around you. Just like the way, like the e-commerce, or you were able to put a store on the information highway, right? Now imagine you are able to take the information highway, put it into the physical or store itself, right? So you really know, and you're able to catalog and tag every single object that you see in the physical world around you. And that is the future of mapping, right? And this policy is actually unleashing this whole ecosystem of innovation that is now possible, because more and more, this tiny little camera has got lidar in it, and you can actually literally see every single object. Now it's not just for refining the images, or the bouquet effect that you see in the in your images, but it is going to actually help you tag every single object that you find on my desk, that you will find outside, every single one of them. And that's where the computing moving onto the edge is going to completely unleash, right? So what we are seeing right now is probably 7 or 8%, whenever even Google is talking about 7 or 8% of the economic potential, which we are directly seeing now. almost 90 to 95% of the economic potential we can't even see, because none of those applications have been built so far, right? So I think that is where the bringing the physical and the digital world together, I mean, we have not even started to comprehend what it might be. And that's why it's great news for Indian startups, founders were thinking about, okay, what is it next, right? After the mobile revolution, I think maps, combined with AI and robotics, they are going to form the next big wave of change in terms of massive businesses, that the potential we have now in terms of it is possible to create such kind of businesses focused and on top of mapping from India now.
Thank you, Makant, and great to hear about the opportunity that it unleashes. And we can understand in the future world, which will be totally based on IoT, and the digital economy will require mapping information almost everywhere. But I think let us understand why this policy announcement is so important and what difference does it make when there is already Google Maps being there. And we would like to hear from Lalitesh. Number one, maybe if you can throw some light on how is it going to be different uh, from using Google Maps, using, for example, Map My India's products, and any other product that is going to come in future. Uh, Secondly, we would also like to understand your perspective, Lalitesh, on the digital sovereignty that it will have, on the aspect of digital sovereignty, having our own mapping information within the country, indigenous information. These two things, if I can, I have your permission. I have one third question also, is about, can we take it international?
Yeah. So I'll answer the last question first. We can only take it international when we have one of the best mapping technologies available. And that will only happen if we start in our own backyard and map India richly. So to answer your question, why do we need a mapping policy to make mapping easier and so on when we already have Google and so on, is very simple. That's the reason why Mohit is on this call. India is not mapped, right? I would say about 15% of India is mapped. That's my guess. If everything that matters in India needs to be mapped, me saying that 15% of India is mapped is probably being generous. If you went rigorous of taking everything that matters for development, for finance, for logistics and delivery and e-commerce and everything, will probably be less than that, right? So there's a lot of work to be done, and it won't happen by just one company doing it. And you asked a question about Mohit's company doing mapping on its own. Anybody who's run a startup will tell you that you need to focus, right? There's a whole all of India needs to be fed, and they need to be given stuff, right? That's hard enough without having to create a mapping platform, and people who create mapping platforms need to just do that, right? And these layers need to be available at in like Mohit alluded to, they need to have open APIs, and they need to have a cost that makes sense, right? I would say it should be one third, if not one fifth or one tenth the cost that it is today, because otherwise digital India becomes a rich people's tool, right? Let's suppose, I mean, if you go in, I mean, I live in Bangalore, so I'll give you an example of Indranagar. If you go to Indranagar and if you go to the side streets, there are people selling fried rice for 30 to 50 rupees, right? Some of them are good, some of them are not. If you want that 30 rupees, 50 rupees fried rice delivered to somebody's house, right, and you're going to charge the charging structure you have for mapping, which is just information service, it'll never make sense. So the democratization of India's e-commerce systems, like Zomato, like Ola and others, can only happen if the underlying layers become accessible, which is both coverage has to increase, quality has to increase, and the costs have to drop, right? And that can only happen with large amounts of innovation, right? And that innovation can only happen if we free it up and allow everybody to do it. Currently, only, I mean, if I take the two extremes, Map My India did it because there was this passionate couple who started almost 3 decades ago, I hear. and they built decades of relationships and permissions and so on, and somehow made it work, right? On the other hand, you have Google, which has the staying power because they have this large amount of, there is this large spigot of money called ads, right? So they can spend 300 $500 million before they make a penny, and once they make the penny, that money will come in a flood because they create a monopoly. So these two, none of these two extremes work. We need a large amount of innovation. And the other thing is, mapping technology is changing constantly, and what needs to map also is changing, right? And all of that can only happen if we make it as free as creating websites. If creating websites were as regulated as maps were, we would probably have less than 40 websites in India today, right? And you can imagine India with 40 websites, and that would not be very useful. So I'm looking forward to a world where we have hundreds, if not thousands, of mapping innovations coming up.
Thank you, Lalitesh. I think that explains why how important it is for us. And I think Umakant had to leave this discussion in between. Rohan has just now sent a message. He was supposed to be joining, but I think he's stuck up somewhere due to some personal issues. He's away from the office. I've asked him his perspective, but I was hearing him in another discussion and where he elaborately described how in detail they have mapped India, and they are able to, I mean, according to them, they can serve any application, right? And to a great detail. But I think we need to think about more about how and startups can use this. I think this is another layer which with the indigenously built product the startups can think of. It can create a lot of new innovative products within India, which requires precision mapping, and some of them can be in the agriculture sector. I mean, first time I saw GPS in US, I started thinking about my farm, few of the things. So I think this is where it can actually help in many sectors, and we will have to see how we can grow the ecosystem further. But let us hear from Mohit more on uh, what he thinks about the ecosystem. I mean, which is both the users using Map My India presently, which exists, and maybe does he think that there can be more players in this area, uh, and especially for his business, how he thinks about using Map My India versus the international products.
So first off, would like to entirely agree with Lalitesh that as for a lot of us urban dwellers, while Google Maps seems like it's the answer to everything, businesses like ours know painfully well how unmapped India is, right? One of the examples for that is that one of our most popular features these days is something called audio instructions. And we've had to launch that, and it's being used very widely because the last mile addresses and the ability to get to last mile addresses accurately is very poor. And as a result, a lot of our riders would end up calling customers for last mile instructions, which is inconvenient for customers, right? And as a result, we created this ability for consumers to audio record instructions on top of their map locations and addresses, which would get permanently stored and can be accessed by any rider, where they would get instructions like, from that shop, take a left, leave four houses, and when you see that yellow colored house, come to the first floor, right, or something like that. Of course, there are many other things that a feature enables as well, but the reality is that there is a lot of ground to be covered in mapping services, especially in India. The second part, and therefore I think while I truly appreciate the grit and the sort of uh, their application to purpose of the Map My India team, the reality is that there is a lot of work that Map My India also needs to do. We keep, every year or so we come back and we do a pilot with Map My India and some other mapping services as well, because we don't like the over dependence on a single large player that we currently have. But reality is that none of these services have actually measured up to a level where we could take a call and say it's just 10% short of where the major service is, and therefore let's roll with that. Let's feed the ecosystem, right? Let's help build that a richer ecosystem and a more level playing field. Uh, I'm hoping that with this regulation and how it unlocks the ecosystem, and hopefully it'll attract more capital, more entrepreneurs, more initiatives, more partnerships. Actually, reality is that for any service like us, Lalitesh is right. Our goal in life is to actually activate hundreds of thousands of restaurants and to deliver from all kinds of restaurants to all kinds of places and all kinds of customers in all parts of India, which is a hard problem by itself. I cannot become by myself a mapping company, but guess what? My riders and my customers generate a very, very large location and digital footprints, which can actually help feed a lot of rich, map building out and information building out, point of interest building out, address data building out, and so on and so forth, which are critical components of creating rich maps, right? And I think that kind of partnership can actually, by multiple players who are actually looking to even out the ecosystem, to create more competition in the ecosystem, to get it to, be a more flexible and more democratic ecosystem, would actually take us where we need to go. The policy is a great first step, but it's just that it is just a first step. There is a lot of work that will need to be done by entrepreneurs, governmental organization and non-governmental organizations, and hopefully partnerships on top of that.
Thank you, Mohit. And I agree, the most important is the will of the government that they have made it happen. And there's a long way to go, really, to make it fully, implement on ground and use it for the industry. But I mean, there could be many aspects which we can understand. For example, I was talking to one of the known persons a few days back, and he was saying, and at that time, this policy was not announced, and even I was not thinking maps. He was saying, I can fill the PIN code, and through an API from the postal department, I can get the area. But why can't I get my address? Right? And this was, I'm just thinking that this was the actual application of, the precision mapping that could have happened. So, I mean, it is going to be really interesting once the policy is fully implemented in its real sense. And let us see how far we go ahead in this. Other aspect that I can think of is in many areas where there is less technology being used, and one of them definitely is agriculture. And government is trying to do a lot of things in those areas, trying to map how much which crop is being grown, and trying to collect that data from demand and supply side. I think that can be accurately mapped. So I mean, they're going to use number of applications uh, everywhere, both in the countryside, maybe far-flung areas, which we can use. One more example which I can cite from my experience is, we used to go to Survey of India in my past experience, where we used to do surveys, area surveys, especially for the radio surveys. And some areas required precision, the strategic locations, the permission from joint secretary, and a lot of paperwork to actually get a simple map. So I suppose, I don't know, I haven't read policy in detail, but I think Lalitesh can answer that question. Does policy solve these issues?
Yeah, I think part of it does. It calls for all the government agencies cooperating, which is a big first, right? And it also calls for mapping data, which is obviously not of security sensitivity, which is most of the mapping data, to be made openly accessible to Indian companies. So I'm hoping a sea change is coming. And let me, just spend a minute about, you talked about applications a couple of times. See, we are at the tip of the iceberg. We have barely scratched the surface in terms of what applications are possible. We are moving into the era of autonomous vehicles, autonomous logistics systems, and we are moving into the era of precision, not just commerce, but also precision infrastructure. right? And all of this comes to life only when you have very high quality maps that you can depend on, because when the algorithms have to run, they have to run on good quality data, otherwise they will fail. So so this is really a enabler. I don't look at the map as the end product. I look at the map as a enabling piece of infrastructure that every digital entity in India needs to have access to. um, if you take a step back and imagine a future, I mean, everybody has an imagination of the future. 20, 30 years from now, do we imagine that maps will be held in somebody else's silo? I think we will have a world where the highest quality map representation of the physical infrastructure will be a public product. And I think obviously to get there requires billions of dollars of R&D. So startups have to do it. They have to make money, and eventually, but we will move to a future where this will be a public product, and that will unlock lots and lots of I'll stop with one application that is very close to my heart. You mentioned farmers, and I would expand that to be include small businessmen and large business, right? India is capital starved, and one reason why India is capital starved is this enormous asset we sit on top of called land has never been monetized. So all of Zomato's partners, which is the restaurants, and its local kirana store and a small farmer, they all have some property that they own. Most of them do, and the property is actually quite valuable. So a typical farmer who has 1.4 hectares of land, which is 2.8 acres or something, average value 8 lakhs, is sitting on top of anywhere from 20 to 40 lakhs worth of land. I'm talking about small and marginal farmers, not even the large farmers. But they struggle to have 25,000 to 40,000 to 50,000 rupees worth of loans. And when they get that loan, it is at 25% in 6 months and 1 year. It's ridiculous, right? They need, I mean, if I have property worth 20 to 40 lakhs, basic economics will tell you that if I'm able to collateralize it and de-risk my loan, I should be able to get loans at 8 to 9%, which is what the big corporations get. And if you just do that alone, we will unlock about, my estimate is we will unlock about $4.5 trillion of capital, both for small business and large business. One of the largest businesses in India is the railways. Railways is sitting on top of $1.5 trillion of land, which they could turn into capital if they chose to. So there's a lot of work to be done, and a plethora of applications to be created. And I think this policy looks at map as the enabler, not as the end goal.
Thank you, Lalitesh. And I think we have had a lot of information from all of you on this discussion. We can have more, but I think this is kind of a introduction, and I mean, important pieces to be covered. The importance of this policy having been announced, and we can cover it later on again once there is some development on it, and see how things unfurl in future. So I'll thank you both, Mohit and Lalitesh, and thanks to other participants also who were there on this particular discussion.